Hi everyone, this is our channel, Around My Story. Please like, share and subscribe.
I'm a musician. Not a terribly great one, but still, I consider myself a musician. I know my way around an instrument or two. More importantly, I'm a collector. I love collecting things, starting from coins to lottery tickets. There's no rhyme or reason to my collection. It consists of anything uniquely interesting I can get my hands on. That is why when I saw an ad on Craigslist for a vintage, rustic, red piano, I could not help but reach out to the seller. The ad's title seemed normal enough. It said, Old Piano, Read a Good Home. It was nothing out of the ordinary, and not something that would normally grab my attention. Still, I felt a strange need to click on it. Perhaps I was bored, or maybe I just wanted to see what it looked like. Either way, I gave in to the temptation. There was no picture, just a story. It read something like this: I'm offering my piano to anyone who is willing to come and pick it up. It is very old, but still playable. I can prove this upon your arrival. It is red and has no brand markings. This is because it was made by my great grandfather. It is one of a kind. He went out himself and chopped down a redwood tree to provide the material to build it. It took him many days to finally cut down the tree and much, much longer to finish making the piano. Nearly his entire life was put into this thing. I, however, have no use for it. It has been passed down in my family many times over. I have no wish to continue the tradition, and the piano is currently taking too much space in my home. I want it gone as quickly as possible. You can reach me by phone at the number listed below. Margaret. Reading the ad sparked my curiosity. One of a kind? Redwood tree? How strange and absurd! I had to see this thing. If it was half as remarkable as Margaret's description, then it was a must have for my ever growing collection. As such, I decided to give her a call. Margaret answered the phone after the first ring and immediately asked, Is this about the piano? She was thrilled to hear I was interested. I too was thrilled, happy to know it was still available. We set up a time the next day for me to come over and take a look at it. I hung up the phone, excited as I could be. I had a feeling this piano would become the new masterpiece of my collection. Being a musician, I own countless instruments, too many to list. Each time I acquired a new item, my heart would race with excitement. The piano was no different. I couldn't wait to see it in person. I woke up the following day with no resistance to my alarm, starting my daily routine in an effort to minimize the time between me and Margaret. She said she was an early bird and that I could swing by early. With that in mind, I showered, brushed my teeth, and got dressed at a record pace. I made it out the door roughly 25 minutes after getting out of bed. It might sound silly to be so worked up over a material object, but to that I'd say, you must not be a collector. Seeing this piano in person was my mission, and it was one I intended to see through the end. I found myself at Margaret's home within an hour. It was a small cottage at a dead end road, surrounded by a forest. There was an old tire swing in the backyard, indicating that it may have been where Margaret grew up. I wonder if her parents passed away and left her the house. Maybe the piano reminded her of them, and that was the real reason why she was getting rid of it. My speculation was interrupted by a woman racing out of the cottage to greet me. She signaled for me to come inside and went back in herself. This was with no doubt Margaret. I hadn't introduced myself in any way, but it wasn't likely that she received many visitors, and that's most likely because of where she lives. Eager to see the piano, I quickly jumped out of my car and made my way up to the stone walkway to the front door. Entering the house, Margaret seemed overjoyed to see me. It was overwhelming, but made things a little less awkward. She rushed me over to the room with the piano. She was so excited to show it to me, just as I was excited to see it. I matched her pace as we made our way up there. Upon entering, I stopped dead in my tracks. It was a beautiful concoction of wood and ivory, the likes of which I've never seen before. It had such a striking red color with a bold finish, and the design was mind blowing. Simple, yet elegant. Highly original, and certainly one of a kind, like Margaret stated in her ad. I stood there for a moment. Margaret mistook my reaction for disinterest, quickly going off on a sales pitch about its charm and history and so on. She then sat down at its stool and placed her hands over the keys. I tuned it yesterday after your call. Let's hear how it sounds. Margaret played a beautiful piece. In addition to playing, she also sang. This is when I took my attention away from the piano and allowed myself to notice her. She was young, maybe in her 20s. Her singing voice, accompanied by the wonderfully rich tone of the piano, has totally captivated me in a way that I can't put into words. I allowed myself to be taken by the song until she finished. Before I could compliment her, Margaret continued her well rehearsed sales pitch. I don't know if it was her playing or her voice, but I was sold the minute she touched the keys. Because of this, I interrupted her. I'll take it. She was astounded when I said this. Really? You will? Wonderful. We were both happy and everything seemed fine, but one fact kept creeping and crawling at the back of my mind. The history of each piece in my collection is very important to me, and the piano had gaps that needed to be filled. So, have you lived in this house your whole life? I asked, secretly fishing for information. Yes, as did my parents. This house is very old, older than the piano. And your great grandfather, he lived here as well? I asked. Yes, he did. Well, redwoods don't grow everywhere, and they're truly massive. It seems unlikely that he would have made the trek out there or even have been able to chop one down, especially with the many trees here at his disposal. It was at this point that Margaret realized I had caught her in a lie. She apologized to me, and she came clean. It would seem that the piano was made from a red tree, just not redwood. Instead, it was a strange tree located deep in a nearby forest. Being a historian, Margaret's great grandfather knew all about it. This particular tree was a local legend, and it had always been his dream to find it. It was known as the Blood Tree, a sacred place. Anyone who touched it was said to live a long life filled with luck. Those who wounded it, however, would forever know fear and misfortune. Her great grandfather, of course, fell into the latter category. Though she claimed not to believe in the legend, she was worried the curse would scare off anyone who wanted it. Dark past or not, I still wanted it. Despite Margaret's deception, I attempted to offer her money. She wouldn't have it, insisting I just take the thing off her hands. That would have been fine, but I couldn't bring myself to offer nothing in return. Eventually, I convinced her and handed over an envelope with a decent amount of money in it. She accepted and helped me lift the thing into the back of my truck. I waved and drove off, satisfied with my purchase. Later on, with the help of a friend, I positioned it in the perfect spot in my living room. I had a new piece for the collection and I couldn't be happier. Or so I thought. For a few days, my life continued as it normally did. My routine remained unchanged. The only difference was the new piece that grabbed my attention whenever I entered the room. After a while, I barely noticed it was there. Despite its beauty, it soon blended in with the rest of my home, much like the other items in my collection. One night, however, changed everything. I had just gone to bed when a loud bang downstairs jolted and freaked me out. I jumped out of bed and took a moment to breathe. The sound was unmistakably the piano's fallboard slamming shut over the keys. That could easily happen on its own had I left it open, and that was not the case. I hadn't played the piano once since I bought it. So what created the sound? I raced downstairs and hoped to put my mind at ease. What I found was horrifying. The piano's fallboard was up. Not only had it not shut over the keys, but it was open despite my never touching it. Confusion swam through my brain, but soon submitted to the clutches of late night tiredness. To make sense of things, I shut the fallboard and went back to bed. Nothing to worry about. The next day was pretty normal. At first, I woke up early, took a shower, brushed my teeth, and started my commute. I worked and dealt with the stress that came along with it, just as I always did. The piano was the farthest thing from my mind. It wasn't until I got home that it crept its way back in. Upon opening the door to my house, I was greeted with a cold gust that rushed out from within. I hadn't left the AC on, so that was strange. I walked into the living room and put my jacket on the couch. I then looked up and noticed the piano. The fallboard? It was up. That could not be true. I shut it the night before. Had someone break in? I ran around my house with a kitchen knife in my hand, ready to attack. There was no one. After checking every inch of my house, I eventually found myself back in the living room in front of the piano. The fallboard was now down. Was I going mad? No, of course not. This was just the byproduct of an exhausted, overworked mind, nothing more. At least, that's what I told myself to keep from dwelling on it. Still somewhat freaked out, I went to my bedroom for some quality sleep. A good end to a bad day, or so I thought. Quickly after closing my eyes, there was another sound downstairs. This time, it wasn't the full board. No, it was music. Not just any kind of music either. It was the piano. I ran downstairs to see what was going on, and then the music stopped, and I watched as the fallboard slammed itself shut over the keys. My heart sank as I stood in my place shocked. When the moment passed, I ran back to my room and locked the door behind me. A mixture of fear and dismay crept under the covers with me. I do admit that I have an overactive imagination. This monster, however, was all too real. The sound of my alarm woke me up the next day. I was surprised I slept at all, wondering if the previous night was a bad dream. This wasn't the case, but my mind gave in to the notion. Living in a state of denial was better than living in a world where pianos came to life. It was a defense mechanism, and one that allowed me to go on with my day without fear or unease. If you're excited to know what happens next, stay tuned and keep watching our channel. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. This time, you get to know the truth about the haunted piano. I left. I went to work. Then I came home and went to bed. Everything was back to normal, just as I told myself it was. Music started playing again. That's when it hit me. This was not paranormal. It couldn't be. It was a cheap trick. Margaret must have programmed the piano to play itself. It was just a prank. A laugh at my expense. That's why the damn thing was free. I ran downstairs to solve the mystery once and for all. Like clockwork, as soon as my foot touched the bottom step, the piano stopped playing. I walked over to it, confident in my new theory. Upon opening it up and exploring all of it, I was surprised by what I saw. It was just a normal piano. Nothing extra was added in its creation to make it play on its own. My calmness was not calm anymore. I stared at the red wood and ivory keys before me and almost felt compelled to ask, "What are you?" Instead, I remained silent. This silence, however, was quickly interrupted by the sound of music as the piano began playing itself once again. I wanted to run, but fear kept me still. I watched the horror unfold. The keys were being pressed down hard, controlled by an unseen force. A haunting peace filled the room as pictures fell from the walls. The house began to shake around me. My eyes darted back and forth in fear. But then I noticed something outside. Standing at my window was a shadowy figure. I ran outside to escape the madness. All the while the song went on. The house continued to shake behind me. The dark figure was nowhere to be seen. Margaret has not rigged the piano to play on its own, but I was not losing my marbles either. This was something entirely different, something out of this world. All at once, the music stopped playing, and the world around me with it. No wind, no cars, no animals, and no people. Nothing. It was the middle of the night at this point, but where were the crickets, the frogs, or even the trees? Where was life outside my home? A little exploration revealed that I was truly by myself. Every living creature in the world had disappeared. What the hell was going on? Why was this happening? I returned home, hoping for answers, but instead, I saw an unsettling sight. It was so dark, I almost didn't see it. Standing completely still next to the piano was the same silhouette from my window. My body was shaking with fear, but the figure did not react. It was frozen like the rest of the world. The shadow was wearing a dark cloak, one that covered its entire body. At its face was nothing but pure darkness. I studied the figure for a few more moments before a familiar sound filled the room. The piano song played, and in an instant, the world returned to life. I fell to the ground, but managed to escape, crawling out the front door and rushing over to my car. I got in and took off with no specific location in mind, happy to be anywhere that was not my own home. I started weighing my options. Destroying the piano came to mind, but the risk outweighed the reward. It could just as easily backfire, angering whatever spirit was hunting its keys. Seeking help wasn't really an option either. The only person who might believe me was Margaret. That was it. Margaret. Maybe she would know what to do. It was late, but I didn't care. I drove over to her place. The dark figure was there, standing at her door. Before I could turn in the opposite direction, it grabbed me by the arm with its bony fingers. Its strength kept me anchored in place, and then it disappeared. I had no choice but to return home. I hesitantly stepped past the piano and walked up to my bedroom, where I locked the door and fell into bed, mentally exhausted. I would not have even a moment of peace, as the song started up again the second my head hit the pillow. But I remained still, sick of the repetition. The banging on my bedroom door that followed, however, succeeded in freaking me out. I jumped out of bed and pushed my dresser to the door, and I hid under my sheet. The banging persisted, but I chose to instead focus on the song, allowing myself to properly listen to it for the first time. Surprisingly enough, it was beautiful. Dark, but beautiful. Its melody soothed me, relaxing me to the point that my eyes grew tired. I fell asleep and I had a dream. The dream world I found myself in was different. It was overwhelmingly vivid and real. Words like surreal and otherworldly just don't cut it. The awareness I had is also difficult to explain. I was completely aware of my surroundings in the sense that I could feel everything about them. I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's the only description I have to offer. The dream was in a forest. It was large, and at its center, a large red tree stood tall. Every fiber of my being knew where I was. This was the blood tree, the precursor to my piano. As I admired the beauty of the blood tree, a person stepped out from behind. He did not speak. He simply pointed at the tree. This is when the piano leaked into my dream. The song played as glowing lines ran up and down the tree's bark. The man put his hand to the wood, motioning for me to do the same. And I did. It was an incredible sensation. My eyes were filled with visions, a glimpse into the blood tree's past. Its bark wasn't always red. Native habitats came up to the tree every year. They would slice their hands open and place them on the tree's trunk. Their blood then dripped to its base, representing the lifelines of their people. It also signified becoming one with nature, feeding the tree life from within. It was the anchor that kept their community together. This is where they gathered and enjoyed life. A place free from worry, a safe place. This was also where the natives buried their dead. After that, one of the elders would play a song, the same song my piano played every night. It was their song of death. When it was all over, a final offering of blood was taken from the fallen and painted on the blood tree, granting their spirits safe passage to the afterlife. When the vision stopped, my new friend released his hand from the bark and pulled out an unusual instrument. He began playing the song of death, but then stopped. He handed it to me and motioned for me to play instead. I wasn't sure what he was up to, but felt no need to deny his wishes. With little practice, I was able to get the hang of the instrument and play the song. As I played, the blood tree began wilting, its bark changing from red to black. My friend was ecstatic. For one reason or another, this is what he wanted. It wasn't until I woke up later in bed that the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Margaret's grandfather had taken away the natives' headstone. He violated their connection to nature as well as with one another. The tree and its spirits had to be put to rest, and once and for all, there was only one way to do this. I can't explain how, but I knew I needed to play the Song of Death on the piano, the whole way through without interruption. It was the only thing that would break the curse. I ran downstairs and put my plan into action. When my hands touched the keys, the house violently shook, knocking frames and furniture all over the place. I kept my composure. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the dark figure standing at my window again. Still, I continued. I had an obligation to preserve, if not for the tree or its ghosts, then for myself. The nightmare had to end. They roamed around the room, sometimes next to me, other times breathing down my neck. I paid no attention on the outside, but my bones were shaking. I had come too far to lose my balance now. Just as the shadowy figure sat next to me at the piano, I struck the final note of the song. The madness around me stopped. I turned to the figure beside me, and it was the native from my dream. He threw me a thankful smile before vanishing. My work was done. Months have passed, and the piano remains in my living room, quieter than it's ever been before. I even play it from time to time. If there's one thing you can take away from my experience, it's to be mindful of the things that make sounds at night. Try your best not to be frightened, and please let this tale be a warning to you. Don't ever buy strange things from Craigslist. You'll thank me later.